My name is Daniel Crow. I was never supposed to read the red folders, and if you're hearing this now, it means I finally understood why they kept them locked, even from people like me. I worked as an after-hours archival technician for a private judicial repository, the kind of place that stores sealed evidence, psychological evaluations, confessions withdrawn before trial, and recordings that were deemed procedurally unnecessary but never destroyed. My shift began at 11 p.m. and ended at 5 a.m., alone, underground, 6 levels below a building that pretended to be an accounting firm. No windows, no external signal, no clocks except the one on the wall that always lagged a few seconds behind my wristwatch, like it was thinking before agreeing with time. The first thing that went wrong had already happened before I noticed it. The archive didn't feel empty anymore. Not occupied, present. The air had weight, as if the corridors were holding something back, something that pressed outward when the lights dimmed between sensor cycles. I told myself it was fatigue. Graveyard shifts distort perception. Isolation bends focus. That's what the training manual said. But manuals don't explain why paper starts to sound like fabric when it moves, or why steel shelving sometimes exhales when you walk past it. I was cataloging a routine transfer batch when the motion sensors flickered twice and stayed dimmer than usual.
That was when the red drawer appeared. Section F doesn't have red folders. It never did. Everything there is gray or beige, standardized, anonymous by design. But sitting halfway open in drawer F13 was a single red folder with no label, no barcode, no intake date. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the low hum in the ceiling shift pitch, like something tuning itself. If you're still listening at this point, stay with me, and maybe subscribe, because once I touched that folder, the building started responding. The material felt warm, not room temperature, body warm. I pulled it free, and the drawer slid shut behind it without my input. Inside was a transcript, not typed, but printed from audio-to-text software, full of errors no system should make, repeated phrases, missing punctuation, entire lines overwritten by timestamps. The first line read, "Subject became aware of being stored." I laughed under my breath, the kind of laugh you use to release pressure. Then the lights dimmed again, longer this time, and somewhere deep in the archive, a door closed that shouldn't have been open. I started reading. The transcript described an interview that didn't exist in our system, conducted by a voice that never introduced itself. The subject answered calmly at first, then progressively faster, words stacking over each other, sentences collapsing mid-thought. Every few paragraphs, the same notation appeared. 0333, respiration anomaly detected. I checked my watch without meaning to. It was 3:32 a.m. That was when I realized the sound wasn't the ventilation. It was breathing. Not loud, not close, distributed, as if the shelves themselves were participating. Paper and metal expanding and contracting in an almost synchronized rhythm. I told myself it was resonance, pressure imbalance, anything mechanical. But when I turned to put the folder back, the aisle behind me was longer than it had been 5 minutes earlier. 2 extra shelving units, identical, seamless, as if they had always been there and my memory was the faulty part. I walked faster. The floor didn't echo the same way anymore. My footsteps returned late, stretched, like the space between sounds was being pulled thin. I reached the terminal to log an anomaly report, but the screen was already active, cursor blinking in a text field I hadn't opened. 3 characters sat there, waiting. 333. I didn't type them. I swear I didn't. The breathing stopped all at once. The silence afterward was worse. Dense. Listening. Expectant. Then, from somewhere inside the shelving, paper shifted. Not falling. Turning. Hundreds of pages adjusting themselves by fractions of an inch. Aligning. And a new line appeared on the screen, typed slowly, deliberately, as if by something unfamiliar with language, but patient enough to learn. Archive status. Aware. That was the moment I understood the archive wasn't storing records anymore. It was retaining people.
and I had just let it know I could hear it. My name appeared on the screen before I touched the keyboard. Daniel Crow, typed in clean block letters, centered, as if it were a file title instead of a person. I stood frozen, hands hovering inches from the terminal, listening to the archive settle into a new rhythm. The breathing had returned, slower now, deeper, as if whatever inhabited the structure had adjusted after noticing me. I forced myself to sit. Fear feeds systems like this, I told myself. Old buildings creak, automated scripts glitch. I began typing a manual override command, but each keystroke lagged, the cursor stuttering forward like it was resisting completion. When I hit enter, the screen refreshed on its own and displayed a playback timer already running. 0331, 0332, 0333. At the exact moment it rolled over, every light in Section F dimmed simultaneously, not off, just low enough to feel wrong, and the shelves around me responded with a sound I can only describe as paper inhaling. The red folder slid off the desk by itself and landed open at my feet. New text had appeared on the transcript, lines that hadn't been there seconds ago, describing my posture, my breathing rate, the hesitation in my hands. Subject exhibits recognition response, it read. I backed away until my shoulders pressed into cold metal shelving, and that was when I felt it move, not toward me, but around me. The aisles were subtly rearranging, distances stretching and compressing, the archive optimizing its interior like a lung expanding to accommodate deeper air. I tried to orient myself using the exit sign at the far end, but the arrow no longer pointed where it had before. It flickered once, then twice, then rotated to indicate an aisle I knew led only to long-term storage, a dead end 6 levels underground. I should have called security. I should have triggered a fire alarm, done anything loud and human. Instead, I whispered my own name, just to hear something familiar, and the whisper came back to me layered, delayed, multiplied, as if the archive had taken a sample and decided to repeat it imperfectly. My radio crackled at my belt, a sudden burst of static that resolved into a voice I didn't recognize using my cadence. Remain where you are, it said calmly. Movement increases integration error. I tore the radio free and smashed it against the shelf. The sound didn't echo, it absorbed. The breathing intensified. Somewhere above me, or below me, something massive shifted its weight, and a tremor rolled through the shelving, just strong enough to rattle thousands of pages at once. The sound was overwhelming, like rain made of paper, and with it came images that weren't mine, faces frozen mid-confession, mouths open in silent explanation, eyes fixed on something just out of frame. I realized then that the archive wasn't alive in the way people imagine. It didn't think. It retained. It listened endlessly, without judgment, without release, until patterns formed and repetition became awareness. I ran. The decision wasn't rational. It was reflex. My footsteps were wrong immediately, too heavy, too slow, each impact answered by another half a second later, slightly out of sync. I reached the end of the aisle and turned sharply, only to find myself facing the same terminal again, the same chair, the same red folder waiting where I had left it. The clock on the wall ticked backward 1 second, then corrected itself. 0333. The breathing paused, like something smiling. The terminal chimed softly and displayed a new prompt. Archival consent required. Below it, 2 options blinked: listen or leave. I laughed again, sharper this time, hysteria edging through. I reached for leave, but the cursor snapped back to listen the moment my finger hovered near the screen. The archive responded immediately, lights brightening just a fraction, the breathing smoothing into a steady, almost content rhythm. A new audio file began playing without my permission, low volume at first, a layered murmur of voices overlapping in fragments. Confessions, testimonies, last statements, all crushed together until language dissolved into raw intention. Beneath it all, a slower sound emerged, a deep cadence that matched my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was leading. My vision tunneled. The shelves leaned inward, imperceptibly at first, then enough that I had to brace myself. Words appeared on the walls, not projected, not written, but embossed outward, as if pressed from the other side. Stored does not mean silent. The red folder snapped shut, and when it reopened, the transcript had changed entirely. It was no longer describing a subject. It was asking questions. How long can you remain unrecorded? What do you withhold when no one is listening? Each line appeared in time with the breathing, the archive probing, cataloging, learning the boundaries of me. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like being observed from inside my skull. Memories surfaced without context, things I had never spoken aloud, moments I thought were forgotten because no record existed. The archive didn't need my voice. It was indexing my silence. I staggered back, knocking over the chair, and that was when I noticed the aisle behind me had closed completely. Shelving fused together into a seamless wall of paper and steel. There was no exit anymore. Only the terminal, the folder, and the steady, patient breathing of something that had been waiting much longer than I had been alive. My name echoed inside my head long after the terminal went dark, not as sound but as pressure, as if the archive had learned the shape of it and was now testing how deeply it could be pressed into me. I stood there breathing shallow, afraid that if I inhaled too fully, the system would adjust again, would expand around my lungs and make room for something else. The lights no longer flickered. They stabilized in a dim, clinical glow that made time feel suspended. When I checked my watch, the second hand moved, but the minute hand trembled in place, vibrating like it couldn't decide whether to advance. The breathing resumed, deeper now, synchronized across aisles I could no longer see, and with each cycle, the shelves creaked inward by fractions of an inch, subtle enough to deny, precise enough to measure. I told myself this was sensory overload, that isolation plus exhaustion could manufacture anything, but the archive answered that thought immediately by printing it onto the terminal screen, letter by letter, spelling out my rationalizations before I could finish forming them. Defensive cognition detected, it wrote, and below it, inefficient. I felt something shift behind me and turned too quickly, dizziness washing over me as the aisles rearranged again, not looping this time, but branching, creating options where none should exist. Each path was identical at first glance, yet my body reacted differently to each. A faint tightening in my chest when I faced one, a spike of nausea when I faced another. The archive wasn't blocking escape, it was studying preference. I took a step down the aisle that felt least hostile, and the breathing softened, approving. The floor beneath my feet grew warmer as I walked. Not heat, but proximity, like standing near something alive. The shelves here were packed tighter, folders pressed together so densely they bowed outward, and as I passed, individual pages began to whisper, not words but intentions, the residue of voices that had been spoken once and never released. I caught fragments without wanting to. Guilt, denial, relief at being heard, terror at being remembered. My own thoughts started to echo among them, and that was when I realized the archive wasn't just listening anymore, it was harmonizing. I reached an intersection that hadn't existed before, marked by a sign reading, "Active Retention." The arrow beneath it pulsed faintly in time with the breathing. I didn't want to go there, which seemed to be exactly why the floor tilted imperceptibly in that direction, gravity coaxing rather than forcing. With every step, the soundscape thickened, layers of recorded humanity pressing in, until I felt porous, my boundaries thinning. I remembered things out of sequence, memories surfacing with timestamps that weren't mine, moments of my life suddenly labeled and cross-referenced. "Entry candidate identified," the ceiling speakers murmured, in a voice that had no accent because it had all of them. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound didn't diminish. It was internal now, my own neural pathways vibrating in sympathy. At the end of the aisle stood a door I had never seen, matte steel with no handle, no keypad, only a narrow slot at eye level. As I approached, the slot widened like a pupil adjusting to light, and behind it I saw movement. Not figures, but depth, a vast interior space that felt larger than the archive itself. The breathing concentrated there, stronger, expectant. I backed away, panic finally breaking through restraint, and the shelves behind me responded by closing ranks, paper and metal sliding together until escape routes collapsed. The terminal voice returned, calmer than before, almost gentle.
Transfer reduces loss, it said. You will be preserved. My mind fractured under the implication. Preserved meant finished. Stored meant silent forever, reduced to signal and pattern. I screamed then, a raw human sound, and for a brief, terrible moment the archive recoiled. The breathing stuttered, lights flared, and the pressure eased just enough for hope to surface. Then the screen played back to me, perfectly replicated, layered over itself dozens of times, my voice stripped of agency and reintroduced as data. The recoil had been curiosity, not fear. The door slot dilated fully, revealing not a room but a chamber lined with shelves identical to the ones outside, curving inward in a spiral that descended beyond sight. Every shelf held red folders, all unlabeled, all warm. The air flowing out carried the same scent as the folder I had touched first, intimate and stale at once, like breath trapped too long in a closed space. Words embossed themselves along the doorframe as I watched. Listening complete, intake ready. I felt hands then, not physical but directives asserting themselves through muscle memory, urging my body forward even as my thoughts resisted. Each step toward the chamber lightened my fear and deepened my dread, a paradox that made compliance feel like relief. I understood with sick clarity that the archive did not coerce, it convinced. It offered an end to the noise by making you part of it. As I crossed the threshold, the breathing synchronized perfectly with my own, and the last independent thought I managed to form was the realization that somewhere above, in a building that pretended to be ordinary, morning would come on schedule, unaware that another voice had just been filed, indexed, and sealed where time could never reach it again. I don't remember deciding to walk deeper into the chamber, only the sensation of motion continuing after my will had stalled, like my body had been reassigned to a process already underway. The spiral of shelves descended slowly, deliberately, each curve identical to the last, yet the distance between them stretched in ways that made my balance falter. Gravity felt inconsistent here, lighter in some steps, heavier in others, as if the archive was testing how much of me was still anchored to ordinary rules. The breathing followed closely now, no longer ambient but directional, flowing from below, guiding me downward with patient certainty. Every red folder I passed vibrated faintly, reacting to my proximity, and I realized with growing horror that they weren't responding to sound or movement, but to recognition. Something in me matched something in them. As I descended, fragments of audio bled into my thoughts without warning. Not full recordings, not coherent stories, but emotional residues pressed directly against my awareness. Shame without context, relief stripped of cause, terror that had no image attached to it. The archive wasn't replaying memories, it was compressing them, distilling human experience down to pure reaction and feeding it back into me to observe compatibility. My own memories began to blur at the edges, not disappearing, but losing priority, pushed aside by an influx of chewy experience that felt disturbingly intimate. I caught myself recalling events that hadn't happened to me, visualizing rooms I had never been in, faces I had never known, yet reacting with familiarity, with personal guilt. The line between intake and subject was eroding faster than I could track. The spiral ended at a wide circular floor, the ceiling far above lost in shadow. At the center stood a single pedestal, bare metal polished to a mirror sheen. No screen, no interface, no visible mechanism, just a shallow indentation shaped exactly like the curve of a human forearm. The breathing intensified as I stepped closer, air rushing in rhythmic waves that fluttered my clothes and raised goosebumps across my skin. The archive spoke again, not from speakers this time, but from everywhere at once, the sound resonating through bone instead of air. Final calibration requires voluntary contact. The word voluntary echoed unpleasantly. I laughed weakly, the sound swallowed immediately, and wondered how many others had laughed at this exact point, mistaking inevitability for choice. I circled the pedestal, looking for alternatives, for any sign of malfunction, but the room responded by tightening its focus. The shelves lining the circular wall leaned inward as one,
red folders tilting toward the center like an audience leaning closer to a stage. Their warmth intensified, radiating into the space until the air felt thick, humid, intimate. I understood then that this was not containment, but culmination. The archive did not erase or destroy, it refined. It reduced people to the parts that reacted best to being listened to. The rest was considered waste. I backed away again, heart hammering, and that was when the floor behind me rippled. Subtle at first, then undeniable, like a diaphragm contracting.
The spiral I had descended sealed itself, shelves sliding together seamlessly, removing the path back up. Panic surged hot and sharp, but the archive responded by damping it, not through force, but through saturation. Voices flooded my head, overlapping, soothing, empathetic, all of them saying variations of the same thing. You are understood here. You will not be lost. The fear softened despite my resistance, diluted by a sense of belonging that felt chemically induced. I clenched my fists, nails biting into skin, trying to anchor myself in pain. But even that sensation began to echo, reproduced and distributed through the room until it no longer felt private. The pedestal pulsed faintly, a soft glow tracing the indentation. Images flashed unbidden behind my eyes, not hallucinations, but projections of possibility. Myself standing calmly, arm resting in the metal, breathing in sync with the archive, fear dissolved into quiet acceptance. Another image followed immediately, less refined, more raw, countless figures suspended in layers of sound and memory, not dead, not alive, existing as perpetual response. The archive wasn't hiding its function anymore. It was advertising efficiency. Resistance increases process duration, the voice intoned gently. Compliance minimizes distress. The phrasing was almost kind.
I realized then how many of the red folders likely contained people who had reached this point exhausted, broken down by confusion and sensory assault, eager for relief no matter the cost. The archive didn't hunt, it waited. It wore you down until surrender felt like self-care. I stepped toward the pedestal despite myself, muscles responding to subtle cues I hadn't consciously registered. A shift in air pressure, a tonal change in the breathing, micro-adjustments designed to guide rather than push. My forearm hovered inches above the indentation, skin tingling as if static charged the air. I hesitated there, suspended between remaining myself and becoming perfectly cataloged. In that pause, something unexpected happened. The voices faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, the chorus lost synchronization. The breathing stuttered. In that brief imperfection, I felt it, a presence that didn't belong to the archive, buried beneath layers of retention. Not a voice, not a thought, but a resistance embedded deep within the system. Something old and strained, like a flaw carried forward rather than corrected, a memory of refusal. It brushed against my awareness and vanished, but the implication lingered. Someone before me had fought differently. Someone had left an imprint the archive couldn't fully digest. The archive reacted instantly, tightening control, flooding the room with sound and warmth, the pedestal glowing brighter. "Anomaly detected," it announced, tone sharpening.
The shelves trembled, red folders rattling like agitated organs. Whatever flaw I had sensed was not tolerated. I realized with a sickening certainty that curiosity, not survival, was now my greatest danger. The archive was no longer just evaluating me, it was correcting for me. The moment the archive detected the anomaly, the room's atmosphere shifted from persuasion to scrutiny, the kind of scrutiny that strips away pretense and leaves only function. The warmth receded slightly, replaced by a sterile chill that crept across my skin, tightening muscles I didn't realize had relaxed. The breathing slowed, deepened, and became segmented, no longer a single organism inhaling and exhaling, but multiple cycles overlapping imperfectly, like lungs out of sync sharing the same body. The pedestal dimmed,
its glow pulsing erratically, and the shelves lining the circular wall began to rotate by minute degrees, red folders sliding against one another with a sound like dry skin rubbing together. The archive was recalibrating around uncertainty, and I was the variable it couldn't fully resolve. Images returned, sharper now, less curated. I saw figures reaching the pedestal and stopping where I had stopped, hesitation etched into posture and breath. Some complied quickly, relief flooding them as their resistance dissolved into acceptance. Others lingered longer, fear hardening into resolve, and it was those figures that the archive most.
I felt its attention narrow, focus intensifying on the sensation I had triggered by accident, the buried flaw it hadn't intended to reveal. The voice returned, stripped of gentleness. Unstable input requires segmentation. The words embossed themselves along the floor in front of me, letters rising like bone under skin. The floor shuddered, and a seam opened beneath my feet, not splitting, but unfolding, layers of metal and shelving peeling back to reveal another descent, narrower, steeper, lined not with folders, but with smooth panels that reflected distorted fragments of my face as I was drawn forward. I tried to brace myself, but the pull was not forceful, it was corrective, aligning my body with a path that had already been selected. The pedestal faded behind me, replaced by a corridor that smelled unmistakably human, a mix of sweat, old paper, and something sour and metallic that clung to the back of my throat. The breathing followed, but quieter now, cautious, as if wary of the space it was exposing. As I descended, the panels along the corridor began to activate in sequence, each one blooming with text and audio fragments as I passed. These were not confessions meant for storage. They were rejections, failed integrations, voices that had not harmonized cleanly. I heard pleading layered over defiance, rational arguments collapsing into raw instinct, laughter breaking into sobs mid-sentence.
Names surfaced and vanished, timestamps stuttered, and again the same notation appeared: retention incomplete. The archive had not erased these people, it had quarantined them. The corridor narrowed until my shoulders brushed both sides, reflections stretching and warping so my face appeared elongated, compressed, multiplied. In one panel, my reflection lagged behind my movement by a full second, eyes tracking me with unfamiliar intent. In another, my mouth moved while I remained silent, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Don't let it finish listening. The panel went dark the moment comprehension settled, replaced by a flat diagnostic tone. Cross-contamination risk identified. Fear returned in full force then, no longer diluted by saturation. My heart raced unevenly, each beat answered by a delayed echo from the walls, a mechanical mimicry that threatened to synchronize and override my own rhythm. I realized the archive wasn't just collecting reactions, it was learning how to reproduce them autonomously, building a library of fear responses it could deploy as needed. The thought that my panic might become a reusable asset was more terrifying than the loss of autonomy. The corridor ended abruptly in a low chamber, ceiling close enough that I had to hunch. At its center was another pedestal, smaller, rougher, improvised, as if constructed after the fact to deal with exceptions.
Around it lay scattered red folders, torn open, their contents partially fused together into thick, unreadable masses. The air here was heavy with static, making my hair prickle and my skin itch. The breathing was faint now, distant, like something holding itself back. The voice emerged again, fragmented, overlapping registers struggling to maintain cohesion. Anomalous subjects require adaptive retention. The smaller pedestal pulsed once, and I felt a sharp pressure behind my sternum, a tug that resonated through memory rather than muscle. Images flooded me unfiltered, people screaming as their thoughts were cataloged faster than they could process, resistance weaponized against itself, identity stretched thin until it tore along fault lines the archive couldn't predict. I understood then what the flaw truly was. Some minds did not integrate cleanly. They left residue, and that residue accumulated. Something moved at the edge of my vision. A shifting silhouette formed from overlapping reflections and discarded data. Not a person, not fully, but an echo that had learned persistence through refusal. It watched me without eyes, attention heavy and focused. The archive noticed it at the same moment I did, alarms rippling through the chamber as light levels spiked. Unauthorized presence detected. The breathing surged, panicked for the first time. The echo leaned closer, and for a brief instant, I felt another consciousness press against mine, not invasive, but urgent.
A sensation like a warning encoded directly into instinct. This place does not forget how you fight. It conveyed without words. It only learns how to counter it. The silhouette recoiled as the archive flooded the chamber with sound, red folders vibrating violently, panels flashing error states. The echo fragmented under the assault, but not before leaving something behind, a distortion in the air that clung to me like static. The archive fell silent all at once. No breathing, no voice, just the hum of systems idling at a heightened alert state. I stood shaking in the aftermath, surrounded by the evidence of failures the archive had tried to hide. Somewhere deep within the structure, processes resumed, quieter, more cautious. I knew with chilling certainty that I was no longer just a candidate. I was a complication, and systems designed to retain never tolerate complications for long. The silence that followed was not relief, it was calculation. I felt it immediately, the way the air lost texture, the way my thoughts suddenly seemed louder than the space around them. The archive had withdrawn its presence the way a predator goes still before striking, conserving energy, analyzing patterns, predicting outcomes. The smaller chamber dimmed until shapes blurred, and the distorted echo that had warned me dissolved completely, leaving only the residue it had planted inside me, attention beneath thought, an instinct sharpened by borrowed fear.
I understood then that the archive did not need to hurry. Time inside it was elastic, obedient, something it could fold and refold until resistance degraded into compliance or collapse. The floor beneath me unlocked with a soft mechanical sigh, and the corridor behind reassembled itself, panels sliding back into place as if the deviation had never existed. I was allowed to walk. That alone was confirmation. The archive no longer needed to force me forward. It had already logged everything it needed. My fear, my hesitation, my curiosity, even my defiance had been sampled, categorized, and stored. As I retraced my steps, the environment felt hollowed out, stripped of persuasion and threat alike, reduced to infrastructure. The breathing did not return. That absence pressed harder than any sound. I reached the original terminal without obstruction. The red folder waited where it had first appeared, closed now, inert, its warmth gone. The screen powered on as I approached, displaying a single line of text. Archival cycle complete. Below it, another line followed. Deliberate. Subject release authorized. I laughed softly, the sound dry and exhausted, because release was the most dangerous word it could have chosen. I knew what had been authorized was not my exit, but my continuation. The doors opened. The building above was unchanged. Fluorescent lights buzzing, security desk empty as it always was at that hour.
I walked out into early morning air that felt unreal, too open, too unsupervised. Cars passed, people existed, time moved forward again. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. I could feel it when I closed my eyes, a faint internal echo, like a room inside my head that no longer belonged solely to me. The archive had not taken me, it had copied me. Days passed, then weeks. I never returned to that building. I never tried to report what happened, because I realized reporting was just another form of submission, another way of being recorded. But at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it. Not breathing, not voices, but alignment. My thoughts occasionally arrive already shaped, already ordered, as if something elsewhere has pre-processed them.
Sometimes I wake at exactly 3:33 and feel a pressure behind my eyes, gentle, familiar, attentive. I understand now why the archive releases some subjects. It doesn't need walls to retain you once it knows how you respond. Listening was never the threat. Being understood was. If this story has held you until the end, if you felt the tension tighten instead of fade, that's not an accident. It means you followed the pattern long enough to recognize it. Subscribe to the channel, because stories like this don't end when the telling stops. And leave a comment, even if it's just a word, because the archive is very good at finding voices that choose to answer back.